Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. For me, it's a little bit of full circle. I gave my first lecture in this classroom back in 1976. They just threw me here and said, talk. So that was something else. Anyway, I'd like to thank Segundo for inviting me to be part of this exhibition, the catalog. And I'd like to congratulate him on putting together a beautiful show of Cuban art covering over a century, really. And those of you who haven't seen it, you certainly should go there and check it out. I also like to thank Alice Craig for helping me with the essay in the book, for also helping all the logistics for me to get here, and for giving me this microphone with a wonderful Cuban accent that makes it more authentic, you know, when you're listening tonight. I would like to dedicate this lecture to my wife and assistant angel, Patricia Wilson. I'd like to cover today three decades of Cuban art. The first 3 decades of Cuban modern art, and from the 1930 to 1960. And let's see how well I do. I first like to set the scene though, and show you some photographs of Havana, because a particular part of Havana, where it's called Old Havana, and where these artists lived and worked. Okay, not going to say too much about them. This one we're looking at the oldest castle in Havana, where also exhibitions took place, and today is a museum of art. The entrance to the Bay of Havana, and along with the building that I just showed you, the 2 more iconic colonial buildings in the city. Paseo del Prado, a place where artists and everybody went to see and be seen, and we're looking at it towards the Capitol building. The Paseo del Prado again, that was the place to be back in the 20s, particularly the 30s and 40s. Another view of it, I don't know why I have 3 views, but anyway, I have 3 views of it. And looking towards the bay, and the building on the right is Hotel Sevilla, where all of you who are familiar, anybody's familiar with Our Man in Havana, the movie, the book, that's where it was set. The Parque Central, the Central Park on the left, the Capitol building, some of the central, this artists used to walk up and down here all the time. The Capitol building, legislative building, major iconic sort of building in Havana. Presidential Palace, the Malecón, which is really the biggest softline in the world, and it kind of hugs the city of Havana. And look at the colors, because they have something to do, I think, with the art of the 40s that I'm going to show you later. The National Hotel, another place, a historic place where many things happened, and these artists would have been sort of aware of it, part of it. And then some of the streets, so if you get at the street level, these narrow streets where some of these artists lived and had their studios. So the 1930s generation. These are not all, but these are the major artists. This group of people are also known as the vanguard or la vanguardia, or the first generation of modern artists. So these artists were born around the turn of the century when Cuba became a republic. They came of age in the 1920s when Cuba was going through major changes, and there was a whole elite, intellectual, educated class that were very much interested in reform at all levels. They wanted that reform on the political level, on the cultural level, on the economic level. Were making all kinds of demands on the government and the powers that be. And they also wanted reforming art. And the way they thought of reforming art was for music, art, theater, everything, to be aware and be in tune with what was happening in the world, particularly in Europe, also some extent in the United States, in Mexico City, wanted Cubans to be at the level of what was happening outside, particularly in regards to form. Okay? When it came to content, they were very much interested in developing, given the rising nationalism worldwide, they weren't, and the fact that Cuba was just a very young republic, they were interested in defining a Cuban identity, something that would make it not Spanish, not North American, not nothing, something else than what they were, no Mexican, whatever that was. They wanted to define who are we, okay? And they wanted art, music, theater, literature to help in doing that. Like it happened everywhere in the United States much earlier and so on. The Historia de Academia de San Alejandro is an academy of art that was formed in 1818, is still today in place, and is the longest running institution in Cuba of any other institution. In the left is a building, at one point where it was located when they were studying the 30s and 40s. In the right is a slide of the way that they would display works and models to be imitated. And then they finished their education in Europe, in Madrid, but particularly in Paris. There they attended private studios, they went to museums, they went to galleries, and they visited cafes a lot. As you know, if you know anything about this, a lot of the education of artists at that time was in cafes. That's where they met other artists, that's where they exchanged ideas. They met artists from all over the place, particularly from Latin America, where they could speak the same language. The one on the right is by Carlos Enriquez, and it gives you a sense of what they also did in the cafes. Drink a good deal. The plates that are in the front is counting what they owe. Whatever they owe, every time you get a new drink, you put it in your plate, you put it on the plate. And Enriquez says that it was all fantasy. He had no money to buy that many drinks, so he fantasized it and wrote and painted it. When they came back to Cuba in the late 20s, 30s, that's where, in a very informal way, they launched the modernist movement. On the left is a magazine that was a cultural magazine that was interested in bringing to Cuba all the new ideas, literature, philosophy, you name it. And they had contributors from all over the world that wrote in this magazine. And this magazine published the drawings of these individuals, drawings that had nothing to do with their writing. They were just, they existed independently. And where they got many of the ideas that they developed later. On the right, this magazine organized an exhibition called Arte Nuevo in 1927. And to the extent that you can say that any period begins somewhere, which is a lot more complicated than that, to the extent you can say, well, this began here or there. Well, the modern art movement began in 1927 in this exhibition, because it was the first exhibition that excluded traditionalist artists, academic artists, only modern artists, and many of the generation of artists were there at that time in that exhibition. So to start looking at the paintings, I know that it's taking me a while to get there, but I'm getting there. Themes. There were certain themes that were developed, and one of them, in the 1930s, there were two major themes that were developed. Guys, if you want to kind of look around for seats, something like that, go ahead. I don't mind that you walk in front of me or whatever you do. One of the themes was something called criollismo. And criollismo was a Latin American movement, actually, that in literature and art and so on, that believed that the authentic, whatever it was, Mexican, Cuban, whatever, it lay in the peasant, it lay in the land, it lay in the traditional legends and customs of the land. That in the case of Cuba, as opposed to Havana, Havana would have been a cosmopolitan hybrid place where it would be difficult to find the real Cuba. So you had to go into the countryside to find the real Cuba. And it was a philosophy that tied authenticity to the land. And you will find this in this exhibition, for example, a great many landscapes. And the landscapes are very much about that. Like they were in the United States. The River Hudson School of Painting was very much about an American landscape as opposed to a European landscape. If you look at Dutch painting of the 17th century, you have a Dutch landscape that is not Belgian, it's not Spanish, it's not something but Dutch. And so a lot of people, when they begin to develop an idea of who they are, I mean, even us. I mean, look at us. I mean, where you come from, I don't know if you come from Miami, maybe the Everglades are your thing, you know. If you come from Tallahassee, the Apalachicola forest, I don't know. But you develop an identity often based on place, okay? And so that. So they looked at the landscape in different ways. Antonio Gatorno, Cuban, obviously Cuban, he studied in San Alejandro, studied in Europe, came back in the late 20s, and there developed his style, based in part on early Renaissance painting, 15th century painting, and also based on the work of Gauguin. And he decided that what he wanted to do, his subject matter was going to be the peasant. And here is one of those paintings, one of his most famous paintings, in which there are a number of things going on. If you look at the male peasant and his son, he was attuned to the poverty of the peasant of the time, and he's closest to the earth. If you look at the colors, you look at the thinness, and so on and so forth. When it came to women, he kind of represented them more idealized, the pretty women concept thing. And she wears the Cuban national flower over her ear, smoking a cigarette, a sign of liberation at the time. And then if you were to look at the place that they're sitting and they're at, highly, highly idealized version of a bohío, or the traditional homestead of the Guajiro. If you look at everything is new, very, very neat, as opposed to the way that they really were. The furniture, the seating, everything is very neat, almost like a scene for a theater, okay? And if you were to look at the coffee maker, forget about it. You find that coffee maker only the most expensive or wealthier homes in Havana. And the countryside would never find anything like that. And they were just very different from this. So he would idealize the peasant in some areas. In some areas he didn't. He kind of showed the way they were. He was a close friend of John Dos Passos, the American writer, who wrote about him as being the painter of the peasants and their poverty and this and that. But I think Dos Passos weren't far there. A mural of his, also called Bacardi mural, because it was done in New York for the Bacardi headquarters in the Empire State Building in 1938. Today it's in Miami, in the Bacardi headquarters in Miami. And there he did the same. He painted the landscape, the sugarcane field. Cuba had a monoculture economy. The sugar refined mills in the back. In the front, the Guajiro again. Partly at work, partly, if you look at the one all the way in the left, Guajiro in his white horse with this lover, all dressed up like Sunday clothing. Very neat. If you look on the one on the right, it's a scene kind of like the one that we saw. And then in the middle, the worker themselves, with a little bit of more realism as to what the Guajiro was all about. He insisted that to move his painting, he needed a real goat to make it real. So they brought a goat, he didn't ask for a horse, thank God. So they brought a goat all the way to the 20th floor there of the party building, and the goat got lost. And when we went over the building, they had to call rescue and everything to get a hold of the goat. So it was quite a scene that he caused. Eduardo Vela studied at San Alejandro, studied in Madrid, and also in Paris. And he also represented the Guajiro. He actually was a Guajiro, so he had a little more experience than Gatorno did, who was a man from Havana. And here's a 1928 painting that he did in Paris. A lot of these artists, through nostalgia, began to develop a Cuban subject matter while in Paris, actually. And this is a style that he developed at the time, partly influenced by an artist named Jules Pascan, partly influenced by early Chagall. And there you have the Guajiro, the typical dress, and some symbolic sort of attributes. One of them, the rooster. The Guajiros, the famous favorite pastime was cockfighting, so that is there. The guitar, the Guajiros developed a kind of music that was highly improvisational, and was a kind of a type of music, like folk music here or something like that. And we're known for that. The Guajiro were also romantics, always falling in love. And the women, and look at the guy who's playing the guitar and looking at her, and so that's also part of the attributes of the Guajiro. So trying to figure out a language and try to figure this man, this figure, and who is this figure? What are the attributes of this figure that we think is authentic Cuba? Same artist, changed his styles quite a bit in his lifetime. He went back to Europe in the 30s, looked at a lot of early Italian Renaissance painting, became influenced by that too. Looked at Diego Rivera, and was also influenced by Diego Rivera, and then developed this version of Guajiros, a more serious kind of gravita of the Guajiro. But some of the same symbolism, okay? Some of the same, with the addition of the horse and the sort of the simple housing in the back. Victor Manuel, an artist that studied San Alejandro, studied in Paris, came back to Cuba. In Paris, became quite influenced by Gauguin and Cézanne. You're probably thinking, if you're not a historian or whatever, you say, well, you said that the people were trying to get up to date with international styles, and you're telling me that over there in the 20s, and then you're telling me they're looking at Gauguin and Cézanne. Well, that's kind of passé, wasn't it? Gauguin and Cézanne were no longer avant-garde by the 1920s. They were gone from the scene, but they were kind of conservative. Some of the artists were kind of conservative, and they kind of looked at, they didn't look at the 80s what was going on. At least not Victor Manuel, not that one. And anyway, he didn't, in the 30s and so on, he didn't venture too much out into the countryside. He liked to actually paint the parks of Havana, okay? And so this is one of those park scenes. There's a beautiful one in the exhibition, don't miss it. And in the park scenes, he liked to concentrate on representing a view of Havana that already was based on nostalgia of the past. You don't see cars, you see people sitting back, relaxing, talking, romancing. He would think of the Havana of the 1900s when he was growing up, not the Havana of the 1930s and 40s. Okay? Another view, a later part, he lightens up his palette as time goes on and become perhaps a little more narrative, okay, in what is represented. But again, a laid-back view of Havana, of the Caribbean that still exists today. Most people who think of the Caribbean think of a very laid-back place, people sitting around all the time and talking and playing and so forth. To what extent that is true or not, I'll let you be the judge of that. Alicia Fernandez is a different. I hope you can see a difference here. Alicia Fernandez was self-taught, died 1933 when he was about 33 years old. Poor man, came from the poorest of classes, and left behind a very limited amount of work. This was titled, you can read the title there. But what it was about is that itinerant photographers will go by the countryside and take photographs of family. People who had never had a photograph taken of themselves, okay? And this is actually based on a real photograph of his family, okay? And so you see these people being photographed. If you look at them, they kind of look ill at ease, because they never had done that before. If you look at their dresses are probably the best they had that they brought out. Maybe the person all the way to the right with the flowers, a family from Havana that came and brought the dresses. If you look at the person all the way to your left, how she's in the grass. You can even see her legs. You didn't even cut the grass from the photograph. If you look at the animals to the right, they're malnourished, okay? And most interesting, they're taking the photograph outside. This kind of photograph is usually taken inside people's houses to show something of their status, their possessions, you know. But they live in such a poor place that was probably dark, small. You see it to the right there, that they couldn't even do that inside the house. So in a kind of subtle way, let us know something about the poverty of the countryside. Okay? Alicia Fernandez interestingly represented women. He liked to represent women. And that in itself is not peculiar, but what is peculiar is that he represented women as strong and as workers, as opposed to what? sex objects, which was most of what his colleagues did, and most painters of the 1930s did. Okay, that's not the way he represented them, and that's curious and quite interesting. In this one, look at how monumental they are, and how they're taking the task of washing, some carrying their children, and the common culmination is something else. Those reds, the way they bring out the blues, is something else. One of our most unique artists, really, that came out of nowhere as far as training or anything like that. And now, a little more towards the social criticism. The work of Carlos Enriquez. Carlos Enriquez, born to a very wealthy family. He studied in high school art in Philadelphia. Went to Philadelphia to study engineering, and there he studied art at the academy in there. He there met Alice Neal. Familiar with Alice Neal? Anybody here? Famous American painter. Married her, worked with her for a while in Havana. Then went to Europe, and there became acquaintance in Madrid, Paris. He did begin to use expressionism, surrealism. He was quite aware of what was happening at the time. Okay? Then came back to Cuba and developed his original style based on transparencies, in this case based on heavy-duty social criticism, okay? Of the way that the really poor peasants lived during the Depression in Cuba in the 1930s. Okay? And now that we are in election season, get a hold of the election poster in the Post, vote, and get a hold of the characters asking us to vote for. Another painting of the working peasants is coal was a major source of energy in Cuba in the 1930s. And this is the coal was made in this place that looked like hell and felt like hell. Okay? This is one of the most horrific representations of the Cuban landscape ever. The total opposite, kind of the bizarre opposite of the pretty landscapes that you see pretty much everywhere. Carlos Enrique was interested in many aspects of the countryside. He was particularly interested in the myth and the legends. And within that was particularly interested in the outlaws that live in the countryside. During the war, he was also very interested in the War of Independence of the late 19th century. And during the Wars of Independence, there were many outlaws that roamed the land, taking advantage of the chaos that was going on. Some of them actually worked for Cuban independence. Others, they just robbed, steal, plunder. Some gave to the poor, some didn't. And he was quite interested in that. He was quite interested also in the stories of abduction. It was very much the European stories of abduction, like Rubens, the abduction, rape of the daughters of King Lysippus, or Delacroix, the rape of Rebecca, things like that. And he tried to use that to make the Cuban legends of abduction more universal, if you will. Okay? And here, what we see is one of those bandoleros, desesperados, with his gun there. He had adopted a woman and carried her away, running away from authority, husband, who knows what. But look at the way he fuses the woman, the man, and the horse. They're totally fused. You cannot tell in fright, in love, in whatever their experiences, they all become one. Okay? It's a Cuban kind of version of centaurs, big time. Carlos Enriquez, again, very unique in the transparencies, in the dynamism of the compositions. Everything takes place in the midst of a very quiet Cuban landscape of rolling hills and so on. So Mirta Serra, a tribute to the earth. Mirta Serra studied at San Alejandro, didn't travel outside of Cuba at the time, was quite influenced by Mexican painting. You can see the tonalities here, the earth tones, the monumentality of the figures, and this is something different. She's not idealizing the peasant. She's not criticizing the conditions of the peasant. She's just paying tribute to the earth. This criollismo obsession with the land. And they're all very serious, looking down, almost like a ritual, almost like if it's a funeral, but it's a tribute to the seriousness of the land, of where the food comes from, where more than the food, really, their identity, their spirit came from. A very large painting by Mirta Serra, an artist that is not giving her proper due, still not giving her proper due. Can I have the next one, please? Oh, no one. Sorry. Afro-Cubanismo. So, African slaves were brought to Cuba in large quantities because, as I said before, Cuba had a monoculture based on sugar and became the largest exporter of sugar after Haiti, after Haitian independence. And the sugar industry had three parts. One of them was the land that was very fertile for sugarcane. Secondly was the technology of the processing of the sugar that was very advanced. And third was the slavery. So slaves were brought by large quantities. And they came to Cuba practically naked, but they brought with them language, they brought with them music, they brought with them religion, etc., etc. And the Spanish people allowed them, to some degree, to practice their language. In fact, people who went to study African culture in Cuba in the 1950s, they found there were languages that were lost in Nigeria, and they still existed in Cuba. Because most of the African slaves, this is Robert Thompson, who did this study. Most of the slaves that came to Cuba came from Nigeria, Yoruba land back then, and the Congo. And so the languages were there. The music, the Spanish allowed them to play drums the way that Southern Americans did not allow their slaves to play drums. And that's why in the United States, in the southern part of the United States, a lot of the African music is voice, is melody. But in Cuba, rhythms. Huge amount of, I'm exaggerating, about 15 different kinds of rhythms, okay? And rhythms that if you listen to American jazz, a lot of American jazz, a syncopated rhythm of American jazz comes right out of Cuba and the African slaves and their music. And it's not just Juan Martínez is telling me this. I mean, read some of the big names in American jazz, I'm going to tell you that. Hip hop, the same thing, and read them, and don't take it from me, okay? And also the religions. In Cuba, they formed three different religions: Santeria, Palomonte, Abacuá, okay? So the religions also survived. Now, these people also, they fought in large quantities in the War of Independence. However, in the 1920s, 1900s, they were highly marginalized. And you would say that even today, probably they're more marginalized than they should be, right? And so, but in the 1930s, there was a movement called Afro-Cubanismo that began to give voice and visibility to African culture, and particularly popular Afro-Cuban culture. And so that's what we're going to look at next in a minute. Back to Abela, and this is a representation of the Cuban, again, painted in Paris, of the Cuban carnivals. Cuban carnivals, or any carnival anywhere, came out of the African traditions, okay? And so here's a representation of that. And the drumming, the figure whose dress is an allusion to Yemaya, the goddess of the sea, dressed in white and kind of like a mermaid. You see again that style, Pascan-like style that I mentioned earlier. And I mean, they adapted this style. They didn't just go and copy it. It wasn't like that. It was an adaptation of something. They had to start somewhere. We all have to start somewhere. Victor Manuel, another representation of the carnivals that took place in Havana, that off and on were outlawed in the 19th century. And so that, notice the interesting movement here. Okay. Another thing, because when they came to represent the Afro-Cubans, there's a good deal of stereotyping that went on. Okay? One had to do with music, and the other one had to do with rituals and myth, and this one has to do with rituals and myth. Animals were sacrificed, dances were made to the deities, oftentimes at night. Carlos Enriquez, back to Carlos Enriquez. On the right, you have a traditional representations of the Virgin of Charity, which is Cuba's patron saint. In the 16th century, 3 fishermen in the Bay of Nipe, in the eastern part of Cuba, there was a storm. They found this statue. They picked it up, prayed to it, and they saved them. The storm ended, sort of according to legend. And then they made it safely to land, made a chapel for her, and eventually in time became Cuba's patron saint. And the right is a traditional representation of it. Now get a hold of Carlos Enriquez's representation. Okay? Because what happened with the African slaves was that they were given saints and virgins to pray to. They look at them and then they syncretize them with their own deities. So the Virgin of Charity was associated with water and was often dressed with a yellow color costume. So, this is Ochun. Ochun was the river goddess, a Yoruban river goddess, whose color was yellow. So that's Ochun. So Carlos Enriquez is representing her as Ochun, with the Afro-Cubans dancing in her honor, celebrating, praying to her, black angels playing music at the bottom. And so this Afro-Cubanizing of Catholic religion. Carlos Enriquez again, representing a shaman during a ceremony. I bring the right photograph or image that you see there by Landaluce. Landaluce was a Spanish painter who was in Cuba in the late 19th century and who did many things, but did a whole series of prints and photographs which are extremely important from an anthropological point of view. Okay? And here he represents one of those shamans in their costume, in their original costume, most of which have disappeared. So now we know how they dress and some of the attributes, how the drums look, how many things look that we just don't know. So Carlos Enriquez did that, but did it in a modern style, more loose style, more subjective style. And part of the reason I'm doing this is to show you that some of this subject matter of this modern artists really began back in the 19th century. They just adapted them, made it more self-conscious images of identity. And Afro-Cubans represented a great majority or a large part of the workforce, rarely ever represented as workers. Some did, like this artist named Peñita, or Jaime Valles. So a lot of it was stereotypical, but nevertheless, Afro-Cubans found their way to Cuban high culture in the 30s through this new generation of artists. And now, as I say, used to say in a British program, for something totally different. And there's always an exception to rules. Fidelio Ponce. Fidelio Ponce was training in San Alejandro for a little bit, never traveled outside the island, but it never stopped him from telling stories of visiting Paris and hanging around with the artists and giving you detailed descriptions of galleries and things like that. And Fidelio Ponce sort of was a great deal self-taught. He didn't care for Cuban colors. He didn't care for the peasant or the Afro-Cuban or anything like that. He painted mostly using white, which is quite unique, kind of a very unique expressionist style using white and pastel. And he represented a lot of Catholic subject matter and the sick, if you will. This one is, look at the title, tuberculosis. Tuberculosis was rampant in Cuba in the 1930s and a lot of countries, even in this country, among the poor. Fidelio Ponce was really poor. 1930s, he was homeless, basically. And he died of tuberculosis himself, some 13 years after he did this painting. And it's a large painting. And if you look at it, we are the patient. And we're looking on, if we look at our bedside, we look at a reminder of death and some medicine there used to try and cure tuberculosis. And then we're looking at these nurses that are taking care of us in a way. Okay? A very I think, a powerful, kind of disturbing painting. He did it for a doctor that befriended him and let him sleep in the clinic where the doctor was a pulmonologist, Dr. Antonetti, and did it as a tribute to him, and then went and gave it to him as a gift. And Dr. Antonetti had a practice on Prado Street, and Dr. Antonetti placed a painting in the waiting part of his office. So you can imagine being a patient of Dr. Antonetti and getting there and sitting and looking at this. I would have walked out the door immediately. As I said, he did many religious paintings, often very irreverent. Those of you familiar with St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order, and who must be thousands of paintings of this man. But I'm willing to bet that none of them look like this one, not even close. In representing St. Ignatius of Loyola, he actually used a line from a poem of a Spanish poet, Garcia Lorca, in which he says that Ignatius of Loyola, in this small Spanish town, at one time took out a knife and killed a rabbit. And then the bells of the church started ringing without ending. And they thought, that's a good story to make my St. Ignatius of Loyola. And that's what he did. Look at the rabbit there with a knife being thrown in there, and his assistant kind of tipsy, and the church, look at his ears. The sounds of the bells are ringing in his ears. So Ponce was the unique artist of that generation. Now, in Cuba, they study artists by generations, by and large. And they tend to go into decades, so the 1940s generation. These are only 4 artists, and there are many, many more. And the 1940s generation studied barely at San Alejandro. They didn't study much at San Alejandro at all. And they didn't go to Paris. The ones that traveled went to Mexico. Others just stayed home. And they were the ones who developed, they were not so much interested in the kind of more critical approach to the 1930s, the Depression. Cuba in the 40s was, even though World War II was raging, the country was going through normalcy in terms of politics. The economy was good, and so they developed a more perhaps optimistic style, using a great deal of colors and decoration and more Dionysian, let's say, style. A couple of events that were important. In 1940s, you have the opening of a Galería del Prado, a gallery that was the first official, a bona fide gallery. That was not just an art supply store, but a gallery, like a professional gallery, dedicated only to modern art. And this is a couple of photographs on the outside and the inside. And so in this gallery, the woman in the center, Maria Luisa Gomez Mena, was the director of the gallery and the owner of the gallery. She came from a very wealthy family, and she supported art and later on her life cinematography. Behind her is Jose Gomez Sique, who was one of the major critics and promoters of the 1940s, but also in retrospect of the 1930s generation. All the way on your left is Alfred Barr, then director of the Museum of Modern Art and the chief curator of the Museum of Modern Art. And between the three of them, put together an exhibition of Cuban art, the first major exhibition of Cuban art in the United States in the Museum of Modern Art in the United States. And we see some photographs of the exhibition, and we see a book. This book was in Spanish and English, and is the pioneer book on Cuban modern art. This exhibition was important in bringing Cuban art to the attention of North America. It traveled all the way to San Francisco. Some of these Cuban artists began to have representation in North American galleries, and the book traveled all over the place. Today is a collector's item. The 1940s generation also had a magazine, Orígenes, associated with them. And top left Jose Gomez Siglin, Jose Gonzalez Lima, why am I, help me here? Lezama Lima, was a poet, novelist, and kind of an art critic, and he developed some of the major ideas of the 1940s generation. He was very interested in affirming the Hispanic heritage in Cuba, trying to go back into the 19th century to look at the roots of that identity in Cuba, and in developing of a style that you might call neo-Baroque as something that he thought was more appropriate to what the Cuban sort of personality or was, if you will. Below that is Guy Perez Cisnero, who became, along with Gomez Siglin, although they were rivals, major critic of the 1940s generation of Cuban artists, were some of the ideas of Lezama Lima. Barroquismo. So another theme, okay, in the 1940s, a major theme was this thing called Barroquismo or Neo-Baroque, which was in partly based on, in the 19th century, anonymous craftsmen developed a kind of architecture that used, for the wealthy white class, that used these stained glass windows to diffuse the heavy, strong sun, tropics, if you will, and create a light and color in the house. And they also devised this very elaborate ironwork that you put in the windows that were also, like the windows, were had a kind of neo-Baroque or highly decorative style. And another part of this architecture were columns and cornices and all kinds of decoration that Lezama Lima and others thought it was a kind of a native Cuban style. Okay? It wasn't quite native, it was heavy, but native and also influenced by Spain. And so they thought that this was something to sort of develop, if you will, as kind of the identity. But the person really who did that without much theory was Amelia Peláez. Amelia Peláez studied in San Alejandro, came out first in her class, studied at the Student League in New York, and studied in Paris, among others with Alexander Exter, the famous Russian artist, and came back to Cuba in the 1933 or thereabouts. And there began to develop a still life as a form of art. Interiors are still life. And she kind of said, well, the countryside, I'm not going to work with that because I don't know about that. That's not my thing. Okay? Afro-Cuban, not my thing either. Don't know anything about that. That's not my tradition, my background. So I'm going to develop a style based on this architecture, Havana, which is what I know, and on the decorative aspects of this architecture, which is the houses that my family had always lived, and where she lived at the moment. Okay? And so she felt comfortable with that. That was part of her identity. And so we began to develop these paintings, the still lifes, based on the color of those stained glass windows and on that architecture, and that kind of frames the center, still lifes of flowers and fish, two favorite motifs. I'm sorry, can we go back a minute, please? Touch this a little too soon. And so from there, this is almost like a textbook example of an interior with the columns, the decoration with the ceiling, the architecture elements, and the still life in the center. In Europe, she looked not only at Alexander Exter, but also Matisse. And there's quite a bit of influence of Matisse in here. But I think most importantly, this is a beautiful painting of hers, still life, where all the qualities that I'm speaking about are there. She was probably the most abstract of the group. There was a Cuban cultural critic back in the 20s who said, if you want to develop a national style, national quotation, the thing to do is you look at the foreign with Cuban eyes, and you look at Cuba with foreign eyes. And in that exchange, that's where you get something that is native and international at the same time. And the way I see it, Amelia Peláez looked at Matisse and Alexander Exter with Cuban architectural decoration in mind, and then came to Cuba and looked at Cuba, the architectural decoration with Matisse and Alexander Exter in mind. And out of that developed what I think is one of the most unique styles of the time. Another piece by Amelia Pelas. A real giant of this group. A mural that she did at the hotel in Havana was the Hilton, the Havana Libre, and then since then it's had many other names. Here's a detail. René Portocarrero is probably the one that took this neo-Baroque thing to the nth degree. And he studied, barely passed through Alejandro, was mostly, he had private lessons in art, but it was mostly, self-taught, I think. And he didn't travel outside of Cuba, not for a long time. And did his paintings based on his childhood neighborhood of El Cerro. That's the name Cerro there, it's a neighborhood in Havana, where they had this architecture that was heavily influenced by this Spanish colonial architecture and decoration. And later on in his life, much later, painted it out of nostalgia for his childhood. And so here it is. Notice the proliferation of colors, notice the proliferation of forms. According to the theories of the individuals, the Saba Lima and so on, they felt that the Cuban character, thought that the Cuban character was like that. And the way the Cubans spoke, the way they dressed, the way they tasted, just about everything was neo-Baroque. And that was the way to go. Okay? Another one, let's see. Portocarrero liked to work in series and was highly prolific. What I'm showing you, like with most of these people, is the tip of the iceberg. I did a series of cathedrals at one point, beautiful series of them, with a lot of changes in color. Okay? And also did a whole series on Havana, the city of Havana, that is totally imaginary, but writers said that this is true Havana, even though it's totally imaginary. So the real and the fiction, sometimes fiction can be more real than real. So this is one of them. They're large, and they're, look at a detail, how that paint is applied there. This is black and white, but I love it. You can see the armature here in this one. Highly prolific artist. Check them out sometimes. This is at the back to the Havana Hilton. Inside they did this murals made of ceramics. If you look at the square there, that the ceramic tiles that this is made of. This is a detail. Again, based on the Caribbean and Mundo Bermudez. Mundo Bermudez, also using that Baroquism and that architecture that I spoke about, created a view of Cuba where, again, very relaxed, very laid back. The husband reads the paper, the woman just shows her breasts, It's back. It's a fantasy, okay? It's a fantasy of a place, of a time. Sometimes they did very mundane subjects, like barber shops, people playing domino, just mundane subjects done in a grand style, okay, in terms of colors, form. Totally fantastic. There's no barber shop that look anything like that. But it's okay. It's fictional. Very simple, kind of primitive. This is a portrait of Maria Luisa Gomez Menas, where you can see that neo-Baroque style to the nth degree, and all the fantasy. Look at the ceramics right in front of her, the background. She was one of the most portrait ladies at the time in Havana. Mario Carreño, another artist. Mario Carreño, Cuando Bermudez, by the way, was practically self-taught. Mario Carreño did study Mexico, Europe, Cuba, and was also part of this style that I'm trying to describe to you, using kind of fantastic view of that colonial architecture, using again mundane subjects, seamstress. But look at where she sits. look at the divider, look at the, the sewing machine. Everything is kind of fantasized, rise above the ordinary. Okay, the ordinary, but the way it's painted is above the ordinary. Okay? The Cuban countryside continued to be an issue in the 40s, and this Carreño again, now heavily influenced by Siqueiros, Mexican artist who was in Cuba experimenting with a new form of paint, the duco, synthetic paint, and throwing paint around and so on. And so this is the allegory of the Cuban landscape by him. This is another large duco painting showing the workers in the countryside, a very heroic view of them, with a great sense of movement. Mariano Rodriguez studied in Cuba and barely in San Alejandro and in Mexico. That was a native. And he made the rooster the subject of his paintings, a bit of a self-portrait. Okay? The rooster was, why rooster? Well, roosters are universal, really. Every culture has something with the rooster going on. The rooster also, in terms of what they were trying to do, lend itself to color, to representing a rainbow of color. Okay? And so he monumentalized the rooster, or heighten up the colors of the rooster. And the rooster sometimes is used as a symbol for masculinity, and that's where the self-portraiture comes in. Another one. This man painted more than roosters, but I'm afraid all I'm going to show you today are roosters. Okay? That's what you're going to get. The Cuban version of Leda and the Swan. Look, get a hold of the colors here, a real orgy of colors. And his women also are kind of monumental. And then all the suggestions that you can take from it. The Afro-Cuban culture continued to be also play out in the 40s. Back to Mario Carreño, he did 3 major paintings of Duco, dealing with the countryside. This is the other one, showing an Afro-Cuban dance. Again, large, monumental, full of movement, and again, alluding to Africans in respect to ritual and dance. Puerto Carrero also worked with that in his very neo-Baroque style. But the real big figure is Wilfredo Lam when it comes to that. Wilfredo Lam studied San Alejandro in Cuba, went to Spain, studied San Fernando, eventually found his way to Madrid with a letter of introduction to Pablo Picasso, and Picasso, he became Picasso mentored him big time, and there through Picasso met everybody in Paris, from Matisse to André Breton. He became quite close to a surrealist and was an informal member of the group. Came back to Cuba in '43, thereabouts, running from World War II, otherwise he would have never come back to Cuba. He was quite comfortable in Paris, and there sort of developed his mature style. Okay, mature. This is a version of the Jungle, his best-known painting in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I bring it here to show you the size in relation to him. This is the painting, and he said that 2 things hit him when he came back to Cuba. One of them was the persistence of Afro-Cuban culture, okay, and the strength of Afro-Cuban culture. And so he began to paint his deities, his myth, and so on. The other thing that caught him, I said, was Cuba, the nature, the tropical light and the colors. The man had been living for 20 years in Madrid and Paris, no color. Okay? So he comes back to Cuba, the southern shades of green and reds and this and the other, and that really hit him. And so he combined the two. In the Jungle, he paints a Cuban the sugarcane field, the reason the slaves were brought to Cuba, with some suggestions of tobacco leaves, another major part of the agriculture. And in it represents what suggests to be an Afro-Cuban ritual, Santeria ritual of some kind, with mask, blood on the bottom, as if there was some animal sacrifice, some allusions to dance. From Cubism, he took the fragmentation of form. From Surrealism, he took the idea of transformation. The idea from shamanic cultures, as well as Surrealism got it from, that humans can transform themselves into animals and into plants. That we're not that separated from plants world, the animal world as we think we are. And so he began to work with that concept of transformation. This is the first painting, really, that brings the Caribbean to the international European American art world and brings it big time. Okay? Really the presence of the Caribbean in that world that the Caribbean was never a part of. And by being in the Museum of Modern Art, by being in permanent exhibition, made it there. It made it into that club, very exclusive club. Another major painting of his that you find at the American Museum, the Rhode Island School of Design. And some of the same things. I mean, in this kind, at this time he started moving away from color, and his paintings are very complex because they not only have to do with Afro-Cuban culture, which in the right there's symbols of Afro-Cuban culture, of the three major powerful gods, Ogun, god of war, Shango, also kind of war, but there are also allusions, Elewa, I'm sorry, Elewa. Elewa is a powerful god, you don't want to. He's a messenger of the gods, and he's a trickster, and he's the god of the crossroads. Whenever you get to a crossroad in your life or whatever, you invoke Elewa. In any case, he was also quite influenced by alchemy and by Chinese philosophy. And all of that is in there, but it would take another lecture, an hour and a half. He went to Haiti at some point, witnessed Haitian voodoo, and thought that was the real thing. And came back and for a while began to paint these very aggressive, dark paintings influenced by Haitian voodoo. He's by far the best known of the Cuban painters. Right now, as we're speaking, the huge exhibition touring Europe of more than 200 paintings. It's just huge, huge exhibition, known all over the world, really. And another painting by him where he's less Picasso-like and more like himself. Again, Threshold is an allusion to it as well. I'll tell you what. 1950s. There's a wonderful section in the catalog that I wrote, short but to the point, on the 1950s. I think you listen enough for me, and I think you can do that, and I'm gonna quit right here. This is enough of time, of your time. If you have any questions or any comments, I would very much like to go into that.